Sean Brown was abducted outside a GA club in Balahi, County Derry, and shot dead by loyalists in 1997. Taoiseach, the Legacy Act gives an amnesty to murderers. It blocks families of murdered civilians achieving justice. It is the son and heir of the cover-up by the British Army and the RUC for some of the most heinous crimes in the North. It's a unilateral action that actually undermines human law and human justice. It turns Britain into an outlier and indeed a rogue state. It is heaping more pain and suffering on so many families who have already been suffered so terribly through the hands of the British state. Today is the one-year anniversary of the Act. Sean Brown was abducted outside a GA club in Balahi, County Derry, and shot dead by loyalists in 1997. Intelligence has clearly linked the British state agents to the murder of Sean Brown. The British government is doing all they can to frustrate this inquiry. The Irish government, under pressure from AOH and other groups, took a case against the British government in relation to the Legacy Act to the European Court of Human Rights. Taoiseach, what is happening in this case, and when can the families who have been wronged so terribly receive justice?
I can report to the House very good and constructive engagement between myself and the Secretary of State on behalf of our respective governments to try to get to a better place in relation to legacy. And the Irish government's clear landing zone here is that if, and I say if, there is to be an agreed position between the British and Irish governments, it will have to be human rights compliant, and it will have to try and bring victims and their families with us. And I think the next few weeks will show if it's possible in relation to that. Look, specifically on the Sean Brown case, I've read the statement from the Secretary of State in relation to Sean Brown. I understand the Secretary of State has filed applications with the Court of Appeal seeking an extension of time for decision-making and seeking protective leave to appeal to the Supreme Court in the case brought by Bridie Brown, whose husband was murdered by loyalist paramilitaries in 1997. However, as I said to the Secretary of State in private last week, I said it also publicly at our joint press conference, the Brown family have waited far too long to find out the truth of what happened to Sean Brown. We're approaching the 28th anniversary of his murder, and in the absence of an effective investigation into his death, which the UK government has not yet agreed to, the passage of time makes this absolutely pressing and increasingly pressing. Can I say, Bridie Brown has shown enormous strength in pursuing this case through every available channel, and I intend to continue to pursue it also.
Okay, Sean?
Britain's legacy crisis and the murder of Sean Brown. I'm Sean Pender, the National President of the Ancient Order Hibernians, and it's my honor to welcome you here today. I'm going to turn it over to our Freedom for All Ireland Chairman, Martin Galvin, who will introduce our guest on today's webinar. Martin, thank you for all you do. Take it away.
Sean, thank you for all your leadership. What you just heard is Paul Lawless. He is a TD, member of the Dáil, in the Dáil, member also of AOH, the political party. Sean and I attended meetings in April with all of the political parties, Mary Lou McDonald, Rose Conway Walsh of Sinn Féin, with Representatives Brendan Smith and others from Fianna Fáil, with representatives from Fine Gael, as well as with Kieran Madden and the Department of Foreign Affairs. And AOH volunteered at that time. They said that they have question time in the Dáil, and they would raise the issue of legacy justice and specifically the question of Sean Brown and other cases. And what you just heard was TD Paul Lawless raising that issue in response to our request. Today, we're at a crucial point in legacy justice. The Supreme Court, the Lord Chief Justice, Siobhan Keegan, had given the British Secretary of State 4 weeks and then an additional 4 weeks to commence a public inquiry or a true investigation into the murder of Sean Brown. We are going to hear up-to-the-minute details that occurred last night, as well as the progress of the case, what this case means to the Brown family through Sean Brown's daughter, Claire Brown Loughran, who'll be on. We're then going to go to Roisin Reid. She's one of many cases. Her uncle, Jared Moran, was killed in an attack in which the British originally claimed that he and other people who were killed were in fact the perpetrators of the attack, that they were somehow IRA members, when in fact they were victims of the British state, of the UVF, and others. And when they family finally got an inquest, it was going to the end, and almost one of the last sessions, it was canceled by the Legacy Act. We're then going to go to Kieran Madden. He's one of the people for the Department of Foreign Affairs who has represented families in discussions with the British, one of the key people behind the Irish government case against the British government in the European Court. We're going to hear firsthand from him. And finally, we're going to go to Daniel Holder. Daniel has recently, well, he's with the CAJ, Committee for the Administration of Justice, one of the groups that works very strongly on legacy justice issues. He has actually published a report last November on the ICRIR, why it is so disliked and mistrusted by victims' families, and he's going to be talking also. But we're going to begin. We're going to go to the case of Sean Brown. We're going to go to his daughter, Claire Brown. Claire, Siobhan Keegan, the Court of Appeals, the Lord Chief Justice, sitting as a Court of Appeals, had given the British Secretary Hilary Benn 4 weeks to decide or to give and commence a public inquiry. After such an inquiry was directed by the coroner's judge, he had to close down the inquest in your case because the British were covering up or withholding top secret information. And last night, something dramatic happened. Your mother has called on the British to do the right thing. Last night, you got information that the British were taking a very different tactic. Could you bring us up to date on the latest of what's happening with the case?
Thanks, Martin. So basically, the Lady Chief Justice at our last Court of Appeal hearing had said that she would give the Secretary of State an extra 4 weeks to convene a public inquiry. And we got notification via social media last night that he has lodged papers to appeal the decision of the Lady Chief Justice and the Court of Appeal, and he has lodged papers with the Supreme Court, so he is challenging that decision from the Court of Appeal. We are very angry that we found out about this by social media. We were not notified. They served us no notice through our legal team, and we found out in around about 9:30 last night. It came in. We have a family WhatsApp group, and it came in via that. So the disrespect that we have been shown this time and every time, really, to be honest with you, is just phenomenal. But we're really, really angry that he did not even feel that he talks about sympathy and empathy with my mother all the time, but he did not have the manners to contact us directly via our legal team to say that he was taking this to the Supreme Court.
So after all of the demonstrations, all of the attention on the case, huge demonstrations last week, all of the times that Hilary Benn says, oh, he has great sympathy for your mother, in the late at night, without even the decency to notify your family, they decided, take the case to the London Court of Appeal, where perhaps they can get a better result, and force your mother, if she wants to attend the proceedings, or force your family, if they want to attend the proceedings, for those long delays and to have to go to a London Supreme Court to try and pursue justice for your father. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's the gist of it. Yeah. I mean, every court in this land, in this jurisdiction, has said the only true way, the only true mechanism of getting our father's case independent and human rights compliant investigation is a public inquiry. But yet here we sit again with the Secretary of State still taking us to a further court. And because he didn't get the answer and didn't get what he wanted in this jurisdiction, he's now taken it into England. And as you rightly said, my mother she's elderly, she's 87 years of age, she's not fit for that journey, and she directly appealed to him. He talks about having sympathy and empathy for our family all the time, but this is not showing it in any way, shape, or form. We don't need his sympathy, we need justice, we need the truth.
All right. May 12th, 1997, your father was the manager of the Wolftones Gaelic Athletic Club in Balahi, very strong nationalist area, goes out to lock up the grounds, is then abducted, he's then killed. No one, all these years later, have ever been convicted of this, although we now know that there were multiple British agents who were paid by the British government, supposed to be presenting assassinations. And this all happens less than a year before the Good Friday Agreement. When we're on the way to peace, we're on the way to the ceasefires have been in effect, some ceasefires. Why do you think your father, a GAA chair manager, was targeted in this way at that particular time?
So, Martin, we really would like the answer to that. That's one of the questions that we ask all the time. We think probably what has happened is that it was to strike fear into the community, and probably the nationalist community in Mid-Ulster area. There was a recent change of the guard from the point of view of the political representation in this area. Martin McGuinness had been voted in as a local political representative, and there were then at that stage some veiled threats given by another politician to say that the people of South Derry will suffer. And we think then that Daddy, who was a reasonably high profile figure in this area, because he was, as you say, the chairperson of our local GAA club, a very successful club, a very well established club. And he was also a very strong community man who had absolutely no political affiliations whatsoever at all, by the way. And we think that they came in to this area to take out one of its very important sons and take him away and kill him, so that it would strike fear into the nationalist community in this area. And it would mean that we would not then be getting above our station, that we would not be then at that stage really trying to overthrow the old guard of the typical unionist politicians in the area.
All right. Wasn't that Willie McRae who was that Martin McGuinness defeated? Willie McRae, who's very well known, had shared platforms with people who were known to be loyalist paramilitaries, very strong stand against nationalists. And the message was, if you defeat us, if you replace us with Republican leaders, well, we'll strike at you a different way. You better keep your heads down. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, that's the crux of it. He said the people of Mid Ulster will reap a bitter harvest, was his statement afterwards. And I mean, that came to light not very long, a number of weeks after that statement.
Okay. Your family has been to court, I believe it's 59 times so far, and now going to London. You fought them with ombudsman report, through civil actions, and then finally were able to get an inquest. And that inquest had to be closed down. Coroner was investigating. He actually gave you what's called a gist, that intelligence materials that he had showed that there were multiple British agents involved, that material was being held back by public immunity certificates by British officials. It couldn't be released. And that without going through those materials, he couldn't conclude and conduct a proper inquest and give you a personal result. Why is it just all this time? I mean, how was it going to court all those times and then seeing this closed down at that particular stage because the British won't release information about the involvement of their agents in the killing?
Martin, those 59 court appearances, they were incredibly difficult. There was a very deliberate, very obvious attempt by the state agencies in the form of their legal team to try and delay tactics of releasing any sort of information at all. In the end, the coroner, to be fair to him, he micromanaged the release of that sensitive information. They had to contact him on a daily basis at the end of the day, every day, 5 o'clock. What have you done today? What have you done today? And only for the due diligence of the coroner and the due diligence of his legal team, we do not feel that we would even have had the information, that sensitive information in that gist. We honestly feel there was stuff revealed there that we had never ever heard or seen before. There were an extra 18 files had been found in the process of that investigation that were obviously, there was a very deliberate attempt to hide that sensitive information. The ombudsman, Nuala O'Loan, to her credit, has come out and said that if she had had sight of those extra 18 folders that were eventually released to the coroner, if she had have sight of them, her outcome of her investigation at the time in 2004 would have been very different. She did say at the time in her investigation that there was no direct evidence of collusion, but we can now see that that is very, very different from the recent information that was released. to us in just towards the end, towards the very end of the inquest. And as I said, at that stage, the coroner felt he could not give us a human rights compliant inquest, give us the answers we were looking for because of the degree and the amount of sensitive information that was being withheld. There were 6 public immunity certificates applied for, 5 of which were from the MI5. So what has that sensitive information, what's MI5 got to do with my father's murder? You know, why are they applying for this public interest immunity certificates? That's the thing that we don't understand. What have they got to do with it? What are they trying to hide?
All right. Now, Hillary Benn, the Labor Party, they have tried to suggest to your family that you should now accept an ICRIR investigation. The commission that was established by the conservatives and which the Labor Party was going to repeal and replace, but they're now using not only the same commission, but the same appointments. Why is it that you and your family feel you can't get justice from the ICRIR?
Well, for a start, we actually have a judgment from our judicial review, which we had to take because the Secretary of State did not convene a public inquiry, even though the coroner said that that was the only true way of actually getting that human rights compliant investigation in our case. So that was one thing with the judgment is there. The judgment to say that it is not fit for purpose in our case. The second thing is that the Secretary of State has veto over all the sensitive information that can be possibly released to families. So how can you call it an independent body whenever he has veto over releasing the sensitive information? And then, as well as that, a major problem for us was no family representation going to be allowed in any sort of ICR investigation. So you're looking then at them handing your report at the end of their time, and you have no way of questioning that. You have no way of questioning the answer and the outcome. We also have to look at the independence of the investigators within the ICRIR. It's very, very evident that there's several of them were ex-RUC, ex-PSNI, and that's like, you know, marking your own homework from our point of view. So those for those reasons, we do not see the ICRIR as a credible body. And it really is very evident. It's probably nearly the only thing that has brought both sides of the community here in agreement that it doesn't work. It doesn't work as a body. It doesn't work. Families have no faith, have no trust in it at all.
All right. What are you and your family? You've been dedicated to this. You've gone to court 59 times. You vowed to continue the fight. What are you hoping to get at the end of the day through the legacy process?
Martin, we just want the truth. That's all we want. We want to reveal the truth. Why was Daddy selected? Why was he singled out? And who was involved in his murder? I mean, we have a couple of very big fears with this. Either one, because of the amount of state agents that were involved, that somebody had prior knowledge of that and that could have been stopped. Or two, that they knew in a very short period of time afterwards who had completed or who had done the murder, who had handed it, and they weren't then arrested. They weren't charged with any sort of thing. So at this stage now, we have major concerns over both of those things, and all we want to do is get the answers of this. Look, we got the information that there were up to 25 suspects involved in Daddy's murder, several of them which were state agents, and that was a small piece of information that we got. It was quite shocking to hear it, but we want to know the rest. We want to know the full detail of it. And that's so very, very important for us. I mean, we've come this far now, and we're going to see this to the very end. And I mean, you talk about this is multi-generational now at this stage. I have my nieces and nephews are just as invested in this as my direct family. And the Brown family will continue this fight for as long as we can. We really, really find it so very, very important. And we're doing it on behalf of my family. And you know what? We're doing it on behalf of other families that are really seeking answers as well.
All right. Speaking of multi-generational, we're next going to go to Roisin Reid, who's actually a niece of Jared Moran, who was killed in the Kelly's bombing in 1972.
Yes.
Okay. And she's there with her father, who've been fighting the case on behalf of their relative. And theirs is one of the cases which got all the way to an inquest and then was closed down by the Legacy Act. And Roisin, I just want to begin. The inquest began. One of your family members had read a statement, and it just starts out about John Moran. John was the first in our family to go to university, and he was studying science and astronomy. He had big plans. He was working in Kelly's bar to pay for his education. John's death destroyed us. It wrecked our family. After he died, it was as if he did not exist. As a family, we could not bring ourselves to talk about John's death. It was just too painful. Our parents never got over it. Does that represent just the way that your family feels about your uncle's death in 1972 at Kelly's Bar?
Yes, definitely, Martin. It completely gutted us. It was actually his anniversary there not too long ago. Me, my daddy, my aunt, and my brother, you're all here. We're listening, and we're very grateful for her to be here as well. We all went down, and we always lay a wreath actually at Kelly's Bar because it's still there. Part of it used to be the wall, so we always go down to be there for me Uncle John and me Uncle Jared. So we do for every year. And the very fact that we actually got an inquest, the inquest was first granted to us in the 17th of June 2014, but didn't start until 2022. But it lasted for 6 days. Then we had to do a judicial review, and then it started again in 2024 with a new coroner till right up until literally, as my daddy says, the very last hour before the legacy bill was introduced. And just on that day, whenever we got the judgment saying that that our case for my Uncle John, that was it, was going to be stopped. Because we were waiting on information to come up from Dublin. We were just absolutely gutted, just devastated. And we were just, because we were so close. And I think that's what hurt us the most, that we were that close to actually getting finally a judgment, who we believe a coroner who was actually on our side, who's willing to listen to all of our testimony from all our witnesses and all of our information to prove that we were actually what we said, everyone in the local community said was the truth. And I think that's why it devastated us the most.
Well, in your case, your uncle's case, and well, both two uncles' cases, as well as a third person, the British, not only they were killed, there was a bombing. I believe your uncles, one of them held on for a number of days, one of them held on for some time later and just died as a result. Somebody else, when they came outside to help people who've been victims of the bombing, they were shot. But
Yes.
in that case, the British not only were involved, loyalists were involved in the bombing, but they immediately put out a statement that it was an IRA own goal. So they blamed your uncles for their own deaths. They made the victims, they defamed the victims, and made it seem as if they had been responsible. And I think even a British Secretary of State, William Whitelaw, had repeated that false claim. What was the impact of that? Not only family members killed, but to be defamed in this way and blamed for their own deaths.
Oh, whenever we seen that there, we were absolutely gutted because the testimony actually relies on, it was by the British Lawrence Corporal at the time. He was doing the watch over of the area, and he is the actual person who attributes that it was my Uncle John and Uncle Jared who planted the bomb. They were the ones who were responsible. And then how we know he said it was them, and just because he describes one as having curly auburn hair and the other one was short black hair. And he just tries to describe their clothes exact same clothes that they were wearing on the day, which is completely and total utter lies. My Uncle John was there, he was leaving to go home for his dinner. And just on his way out, he was talking to a couple of other bar staff. He was helping them come in, and two men got out of a car and they got into a getaway car. And just as he was leaving to go back home, the car bomb exploded. So it did.
All right. And I've just done some research. There's a website, Paper Trail, which has done investigations on this incident as well as the McGurk's bombing and others. And they have evidence that an off-duty British trooper was nearby in a bar and told everybody 2 hours earlier that 2 hours Kelly's is going to go up. It was correct. And not only that, but there were loyalist gunmen outside to open fire on people who were coming out to help the injured. How were the British able to claim with any kind of reasonable basis that they thought that the IRA would have been involved and been able to coordinate a gun attack at the same time after the bombing?
Because to them, they believed that Kelly's Bar was a bar for local men. That I actually have a quote here of what they actually says. It says the Kelly's Bar premises are ill disposed towards law and order, and in being fairness says they are assortment of gunmen, bombers, and thugs. So in their view already, of the local community and the people who worked in there, the people who went in to drink, that they were people who were the IRA. So the way they seen it was the car was there, that went off prematurely, and then at the same time they organised it as the shooting was coming because people were coming out to help. That's their belief, which we know is a complete and utter lie. Because of the paratrooper who was on duty, he was in Paisley's Park pub and he overheard the loyalists speaking, saying that it was going to go off in 2 hours' time, which it did. There was loyalist gunmen in the area who were arrested. After, there was 3 loyalists who were arrested. Irwin, Graham, and King were arrested as well. So they were, but they were never, sorry, they were never convicted.
No, I want to apologize. My son is visiting. He just came in. I didn't want him to shout and get on the video, so I wasn't waving at you.
No, you're okay. Sorry.
All right. Now, your family, your uncle was actually a student. He was the first in your family to attend Queen's University. He was studying. He was going to be a father 3 months later. He worked part-time to pay for his education, and then he's killed, defamed in this way. You were able to get an inquest. And how far along did that inquest go?
So our inquest is very limited because it's only focused on the exact thing of what happened on Kelly's bar. So it doesn't look into the lack of the investigation done by the REC at the time. It doesn't look into the fact that we got no forensic evidence at all in our case, that the car, this mystery car that planted the bomb, was never found. And nobody who was involved will have names of people who were involved, loyalists of the UVF who were involved, were never questioned. They were arrested, but they were never questioned. They were let go, and nobody's ever been convicted either in this case. And we also have other information within it, but we can't access it because there's a 100-year ruling of a ban. So there's information there that we think is very crucial to our case, but we're never going to be able to see it.
All right. When you say 100-year ban, I think
Yes.
the Ministry of Defense or who applied to have information about the bombing closed down, kept silent, kept secret for 100 years. Who was that who made that application?
MOD.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
the British Ministry of Defense.
Yes.
So, in other words, they said this is an IRA bombing, but they want this information closed down, kept secret for 100 years. That's the British Ministry of Defense, the British Army, and the Ministry of Defense. Finally, I just want to ask you, your family, again, was suggested they go to the ICRIR. Why is it that you would not trust your family, has no trust for them?
Well, we're in the exact same position as Claire. The very fact that you have no legal representation, our representation was crucial for us. Paddy Murray, our family solicitor, our counsel, Fiona and Aidan, anything that we were able to find with our sensitive, non-sensitive folders, we were actually able to get information, even though all the information in it was the same information repeated, but the fact that we were able to get new things brought to us. If there was any concerns that we had, that we were able to question the Lance Corporal, we were able to go to them directly. They were able to support us. We could offer them suggestions and then we could talk back. If you go to this here, ICIRIR, you get none of that at all. You're completely left on your own. You just get a gist of their investigation. So it's the same as the HET report. You get nothing. And then also as well, that the fact is that we found out today through Daniel that there's 17 REC and 10 British military men who are also working in the ICRIR. So you have no faith, there's no trust, because at the end of the day, they're not here to help for our family to get truth and justice. They're to protect them, to protect the state, protect their informers, their agents, and the largest paramilitaries who they worked with. So that's why we would not trust them at all.
All right, next we're going to go to Kieran Madden he's representing the Irish government. He has a senior position with the Department of Foreign Affairs and is one of the people who deals with legacy cases. And I just want to thank him. Sean Pender and I were able to get a briefing that he arranged when we were last in Ireland. And I know Kieran has worked very strongly with all of the other victims groups, with many of the families. And I know he was particularly involved in getting or advocating for the Irish government to bring the case against Britain. And everywhere we go, we talk to victims groups. They are so grateful for the Irish government to bringing that case, to representing Irish victims in the north of Ireland. Kieran, welcome.
Hi, Martin. How are you? And thanks to the AOH for organizing this.
Kieran, is there something you'd like to say to the Brown family, to the family of Jared Moran, just when we start off, just about the commitment of the Irish government?
That's the first thing I said. I don't know Roisin, but I met Claire last September in Belfast with her mother and her siblings, and more importantly, the Taoiseach. I was at the Taoiseach when he met Claire and her mother and their legal representatives on the anniversary of her father's murder on the 12th of May, just a few weeks ago. And the family have shown, I suppose, remarkable resilience and staying power over the last 28 years. I suppose one thing important to say for here, Claire knows this, but there's a wider audience, the Taoiseach, in his very first phone call with the Secretary of State, raised the Sean Brown case. In his most recent phone call with the Secretary of State, I don't know what date that was, raised it and has raised it a number of times in between, including at the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference in Hillsborough just a few weeks ago. The Brown family must have access to an Article 2 compliant mechanism. They've never had that, as Claire had gone through there in summary form. They've had a number of investigations and various inquiries, but none of which were Article 2 compliant. The inquest had to shut down, as we pointed out. And at present, the only mechanism that's available that can offer that it can be Article 2 compliant is a public inquiry. Thank you for playing that clip earlier of the Taoiseach. That's from a few weeks ago. I think it'd be worth, for those who are interested in the case, looking at what the Taoiseach said in the Dáil just 2 days ago. He was very strong on the Dáil record, again, in support of the Brown family. He said it's a matter of the utmost importance for him, and he will continue to raise it. The other two things I'd say on that, for those who are interested in the case that are worth reading, are the Court of Appeal judgment, the Lady Chief Justice's judgment, because it's remarkable in its clarity and its directness. It just sets out the facts, 28 years of facts of the case in a way. I'm not a lawyer, and it's very intelligible to me, and it's just very, very stark when it's all set out that way. And then I think, as for those who might want to read it as an accompaniment to that, is to read the letter that Seamus Heaney sent to the Irish News the week after Sean Brown was murdered, because it is a remarkable, brief piece of writing, but the legals and the facts are set out in the Lady Chief Justice's judgment, and the feeling is set out. I think Claire, it's safe to say that Seamus Heaney was a friend of your father. Your father had hosted him, he got the Nobel Prize, and it's a remarkable piece of writing to read, I would think, as well. To read those together. But I'd say the Taoiseach has been very clear, directly with Claire and her family, and on the Dáil record, in support of the family.
All right. The couple of weeks ago, I just wanted to give you a chance to comment on it. There was an article in the Irish Independent. It said, Taoiseach and Keir Starmer agree on joint approach in tackling legacy issues in Northern Ireland. And right away, people read that. They were very concerned. Is the position of the Irish government changing? Are they going to drop the case against the British government? Are they going to drop the strong stand that you've just been talking about, that's been mentioned several times in the Dáil? And just want to give you a chance to react to that headline.
Well, the headline is a few weeks old, and it was incorrect.
Okay.
I don't know how it was. The government's position is very clear. And it was very clear early on once the bill was published. I think we're almost exactly 3 years since the bill was initially published. It was, as I think Claire mentioned earlier, opposition to it unified Northern Ireland in a way that very, very few things do. And when the bill was enacted, the Irish government's view was so clear that the act was in breach of the European Convention on Human Rights, and the Convention is a bedrock and a safeguard of the Good Friday Agreement, that the government took the decision to bring the British government to the European Court of Human Rights for just the second time in 50 years. So that's an extraordinary thing to do between two friendly states. And I know you mentioned me in that connection earlier. I'm a faceless civil servant. That was a decision taken by Cabinet. So that case still stands. The one thing I would say, though, is there is a new British government in place since July of last year, and as you touched upon, and as the Taoiseach has said publicly, we would like to reach an agreement with them on what a legacy package would look like. But the two, I suppose, broad tests that have been set publicly by the Taoiseach for this are that it must be human rights compliant, it must be European Convention compliant, and it must command the support of victims and families. Our government has spoken about root and branch reform of the Secretary of State and the incoming British government initially said they were going to repeal and replace the Act. But the Secretary of State then said he wants to retain some elements of it. So I'd say the Irish government called for root and branch reform of it, and Daniel Holder, who will speak next, picked up that phrase and wrote 150 pages of a document of what root and branch reform should look like. But let's say, as a government, we have responsibilities to try to get a system in place, because we do need that. It is easy to say everything is terrible. The government has a responsibility to try to press for a system that works. What's there right now is very clearly not fit for purpose. The Act isn't fit for purpose, and the commission that it sets up isn't fit for purpose. But at the same time, there is responsibility to try to get something in place that does work.
All right.
There's one thing I say, sorry, Martin, to say, Taoiseach is very clear as well. He wants to get a deal, but success isn't guaranteed, because he has successes to meet.
Well, it's unfortunate. You had the Stormont House Agreement. You had a deal with the British government. They just didn't keep it. And if that had been kept, we would have been in a situation where none of these things would have been necessary today. I
have to go back. And I know Stormont House, and it is, the Irish government signed up to it, and there was an agreement and a subsequent international agreement on it. At the same time, we do have to work from where we are and try to do the best we can for our families across Northern Ireland. We really do. Again, let's say we're working on it. I don't know if we get there, but it is important to say that.
No, we appreciate, obviously, if you could agree something with the British government that would be supported by the victims, it would be Article 2 compliant, and that's without forcing Claire Brown's family to go to London, without forcing all of the families to go to London, without having to go all through the European court processes. Obviously, that would be optimum. That would be the best. Let's see if the British government at the same time, actions like they're taking in relation to the Brown family, doesn't seem like they're willing to make any type of agreement that complies with the standards that you and the Taoiseach have talked about. Okay. Next, we're going to talk to Daniel Holder. Daniel, as Kieran had mentioned, believe me, you have a pamphlet about root and branch reform of the ICRIR, and that is taken from, I believe, Micheál Martin, a quote by him about what the Irish government would demand. I just first want to begin, you're with Committee for the Administration of Justice. We were able to meet with you, with Grania Taggart of Amnesty International, with Mark Thompson of Relatives for Justice. Mark was able to arrange a meeting for all of us when Sean and Pender and I were last in Ireland. And we just appreciate the work that there are so many groups that are doing on the legacy issue. So just tell us a bit about Committee for the Administration of Justice.
Well, we're a human rights NGO. We've been long and involved in this. I suppose if you walk back to why we're in the situation now, and you walk back to during the conflict, you can look at it in a sense that, in theory, whilst the law applied to everyone, the reality is there were very few proper investigations into killings by the British Army. Indeed, there were no police investigations at all at the beginning of the conflict. And when you look at when you get to collusion, particularly into the 1980s, it's pretty clear there was a system in place that allowed state agents to evade justice. So we've worked on a lot of those issues. When you get to the Good Friday Agreement, there was no truth commission. So organisations like CAJ and Relatives for Justice and families and their lawyers took a series of cases to the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that there had been no proper investigations into either military killings or collusion cases. And we won those cases. The European Court found that Article 2 of the European Convention, the right to life, had been breached. And that's where we ended up with a system of mechanisms like the inquest system that's been mentioned a few times, like the police ombudsman, that could conduct investigations. It was what was called the package of measures that the British government had to agree with after the European Court judgments to allow some investigations. Now, there was a lot of attempts to obstruct the package of measures, but thanks to all the multiple fights of all of the families of people like Claire and Roisin and Chris and many, many others, really over the last few years, a lot of those mechanisms were really starting to deliver outcomes, not in terms of criminal justice outcomes, but in terms of truth, in terms of clarification for victims. So if you look at a lot of the inquests into British Army shootings, the vast majority of them were really contradicting the official version of events. We're finding that victims were innocent, that the shootings were essentially unlawful killings. If you look at a lot of the reports produced by the Police Ombudsman's Office into allegations of collusion, they were identifying quite significant patterns of collusion between the RUC and loyalist paramilitary. So the system that was investigating cases during the conflict and violations during the conflict was beginning to deliver for families. And then along came the British government of Boris Johnson, very populist government, significant level of contempt for sort of the rule of law, separation of powers, and all of that. And as has been previously mentioned, he tore up an agreement with the Irish government unilaterally, which was the 2014 Stormont House Agreement that would have given us new mechanisms to investigate with the past. Then he introduced the notorious Legacy Act that's still in place. So if you drill down to what the essential purpose of the Legacy Act was, there was an amnesty within it that was always going to be unlawful. I think almost everyone knew that. It was struck out by the courts. It's been disapplied. But what it has done is it's done two things essentially. One is it has completely closed down all of the investigations that were taking place under the packing measures, the inquests, the police ombudsman's investigations, independent police investigations, even civil court proceedings were closed down largely on the 1st of May last year. So like a year ago, it closed all these things down at a time they were delivering for families. And then what it did was it replaced them with this new commission, the ICRAR, and it replaced them with under an agenda. I suppose we'd say it was an impunity agenda. It was quite an open agenda of protecting the security forces from investigation. And the way they wanted to deliver on that agenda was to close down all these justice mechanisms and instead to set up this commission to deal with cases. Now, UN experts have already said the legislative framework for this commission is very weak. The British government, of course, previous government appointed all of the people who run the ACRAR, the 5 commissioners that run it. It's been alluded to earlier that the Commissioner for Investigations, the person in charge of investigations, is one of a number of RUC officers. A former senior RUC commander is in there. The most recent numbers we have is 17 RUC officers and up to 10 soldiers within there.
Daniel, could I ask you,
practical implications there?
You mentioned the Conservative government, their attitude to shut down everything. They were on the way out. They knew they were going to be defeated. They tried to close down everything on the way out. Why is a Labour government, which promised to repeal and replace the act, all they had to do was fulfill that promise, and they would have been applauded? Why are they continuing the ICRIR, the very commission that was supposed to deliver the cover-ups to the Conservatives, and the same appointments that the Conservatives made? Why are they continuing this act?
I think that, well, a lot of us suspected there's quite a lot of distinct things pushing at the current Labour government. Clearly, there's a lot of pressure from families, human rights NGOs, and indeed the courts and the Irish government for Labour to fulfil that promise to repeal the Legacy Act. Yet at the same time, there's very clearly a lot of pressure also coming from the military and security establishments for them not to move. And I think during the Court of Appeal hearing in Sean Brown, that became quite evident. I mean, the Lady Chief Justice said that the Secretary of State had given far too much weight to the positions that had been given to him essentially by the government departments that deal with the security service and military, despite those very agencies being the one subject to investigation. So I think we have a range of different pressures, and whilst Labour has committed to repeal, it's now committed to reform, which is a lot less. It unilaterally took the decision to retain the ACAR. It has said it's going to remove some of the aspects of the Legacy Act, like the ban on inquests and things like that, but it hasn't done it yet. It's also what it's doing is it's appealing unilaterally, without recourse to the Irish government, various elements of the decisions in the Legacy Act. So, for example, um, the ACRAR had claimed that it could set up a sort of system of pseudo inquests, a system to emulate inquests within its own investigative structure. And a lot of us pointed out, well, look, that's not the same as an inquest. There's no judge, there's no independent court. Families don't have the rights to lawyers. Families don't have access to all the disclosure that they'd get in an inquest. And above all, British government ministers, through what's called the national security veto, whereby ministers can redact reports that would come out of the ACAR on national security grounds or on grounds that they contain security and intelligence information, which essentially is a way of being able to conceal informant-based collusion. And I think that's what a lot of this is about. They've created a mechanism that's architecture through its national security veto will be able to conceal the involvement of agents of the state in killings and other serious human rights violations. We know the whole system for running informants during the conflict was unlawful, and essentially they seem invested in retaining that. They've appealed those elements of the rulings of the Court of Appeal. They're trying essentially to recreate a pseudo inquest system now. We're awaiting, same as the Irish government, some concrete proposals from the British government as to just how they're going to reform the ACRAR. In our view, only a process would actually transform it into a completely distinct institution that is unrecognizable from what is there at present, not just in terms of its legal framework, in terms of fixing it on paper. The personnel need to change too. It needs fresh leadership to build confidence. And I think the two tests the Irish government set out are the right ones, that it not only needs to be legally human rights compliant, but actually it needs to be capable of winning the confidence of victims' families, because that's the only way it would work.
All right, you've outlined some of the things that would make nationalist families particularly mistrust the ICRIR. We believe the AOH, all families deserve justice. They deserve the same rights of truth. But at the same time, during the conflict, RUC would have been far more interested in investigating if a member of the RUC was killed, if a member of British forces was killed, would be more interested in doing a real investigation of those sorts of killings, of trying to get to find out what happened. How many nationalist families, I know you've tried to do research into that, how many cases which nationalist families were victims of either collusion, British troops, British state forces, how many have gone to the ICRIR? And we're over a year into the ICRIR functioning.
Well, first of all, it's important to say that very few families, full stop, have gone to the ACRAR. I mean, certainly in the beginning there was only a handful of cases. Now it's now up to, I think, about 50, but that you have to compare that to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases that were closed down a year ago by the Legacy Act. People were queuing up to use the inquest system, to use the police ombudsman's office, and despite the ACRAR being the only show in town, there is currently nowhere else to go, even though the courts have ruled it's not fit for purpose for any case that would be replicating an inquest, as in Sean Brown and the case of Paul Thompson, and which we'd act for the next of kin Eugene Thompson. So far, you're right, but we put in an FOA to find out the number of actual state killings that were within the caseload of the ACRAR. They've come back to claim that they don't have figures, which is a bizarre answer, which we've appealed. From the cases that are listed on their website, only one of the 50 is clearly a case where the British Army were responsible for the shootings. We're not aware of any others, so it could be as low as one out of their 50 cases, but they won't clarify that figure to us. But I mean, certainly, if the objective of the Conservative Party, which hasn't yet been repealed by the Labour Party, was to shut down investigations into the state by replacing the existing mechanisms with the ACRAR, they've essentially succeeded in doing that so far because of the lack of trust and the understandable lack of trust in the new mechanism.
Okay, we have just a little over 10 minutes left. I'm going to ask Chris just to go back around to everybody, give everybody 1 minute just to talk about any final thoughts beginning with Claire Brown. Claire, and it's just to ask you, what is it that you'd like to see Americans, Irish Americans, do?
Well, we would really like the support of the Irish American community. We know it's a very strong community. We are trying very hard to lobby as many people as possible that have influence to try and make the Secretary of State change his decision on this. We legally have fought this as far as we possibly can in the North. We are being dragged to England that don't get it. They don't get legacy. They don't get what it was like living here in the Troubles. So from our point of view, if anybody has any influence, if anybody can get in the ear of any politician anywhere at all that might be able to change this decision from the Secretary of State, that's what we're asking for. Do the right thing, Secretary of State, and please, please, please do not be bringing my mother to the Supreme Court. If you can change your mind, if anybody knows of anybody that might be able to change his mind, please help.
Okay, we're going to go to Roisin Reid.
Hi, Martin. We'd be on the same position as Claire. We would please urge anybody with any sort of influence to, in our opinion, would be hopefully if you can get rid of the ICIR or try to re-establish the proper inquest, the police ombudsman reports, get those all back for families. The reasons why they're closing down is because they were working. We were actually getting truth and justice. So if anybody has any type of influence, please, especially for us and all of our families and for Claire, to please, can they please have our inquiry, our inquest and all our reports, can we have them all re-established so we can finally get some type of truth and justice, and to really let people be aware that all of our families were innocent victims.
All right. You were actually, the British were ordered by the court decision that they had to restore inquests. They said they would do it. Your family's inquest was right at the end.
Yeah.
And they haven't taken one step to let you get back into court and finish the inquest that you had.
No. Still a year later, and we're still back at the same place where we were.
There you are. All right, Kieran Madden.
Yep, thanks, Martin. Just, I suppose, picking up where Claire left off with Irish American interest, the fact that there is so much interest from Irish America in legacy issues is just so important. I know it's important for families, but it's important for those who are working with them also that there is this international interest. So I suppose the first thing is to say, I hope you please maintain that interest. It does really, really matter. And I know there are lots of people on this call, also in Congress, we've seen that interest. We had, I think it was 43 members of Congress wrote a letter last year, the year before, on what was then the legacy bill. So that level of interest is hugely important. Please maintain it. If we get to the point of deal, and as the Taoiseach said, there's no guarantee, but if we get there, hopefully we can give it a fair wind. But I'd say all of you here and people like we here on the Administration of Justice will apply your own lens to it. But I'd say just thanks for the interest, and please keep it up because it does matter.
Sean Pender and I were in Washington just over a week ago, and there is a lot of interest in Congress. They are ready for a new initiative. They want to speak to the new British ambassador first and put it to him personally, but there will be a lot more forthcoming. All right, Daniel, last thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we are at another crunch moment here, so all the lobbying and advocacy is and pressure is very welcome. I mean, we really need the decisions to open the public inquiries into Sean Brown, into the Thompson case and other cases, as well as the repeal commitments on the Legacy Act to be taken forward. In terms of the Irish government's position, we'd like them to stay exactly where they are, putting pressure on the UK to comply with its obligations. In terms of the British government, they really need to comply with the rule of law. They should table the legislation now to reopen inquests and civil proceedings immediately. The courts have already found that the ban is unlawful, and then they need to come forward very quickly with the legislative proposals that will essentially remove the ACAR as it currently is off the table and replace it with a proper investigative mechanism. So the more pressure and international engagement, international pressure that's put on the British authorities to do that, the better.
Right. Well, I just say to Kieran Madden, just the thing that keeps us going, when we listen to people like Claire Brown, when we listen to people like Roisin Reid, when we meet with all of the other families across the north of Ireland, We, number one, are never going to let them down. They're motivated us to keep going, keep fighting behind them. And number two, we always appreciate always state how much they appreciate the Irish government standing up for them by taking the case that you've taken. All right, we're going to finish up with our leader, Sean Pender. You have to step forward.
Thank you very much, Martin, for putting this very important program together. Claire and Roisin, your dignity and grace for you and your families and so many inspires us, and it proves that the English strategy of deny, delay, and waiting for people to die will not work. As Claire mentioned, her nieces and nephews are now involved in the struggle, and it's obvious that Roisin was not here in 1972 when her uncle was killed. Daniel and Kieran, we are inspired also by your resolve, and it matches ours to keep working for these people and to not rest until we get the truth for them. And the truth is something, unfortunately, the English government doesn't seem to understand. Their reprehensible actions, making the Browns show up 59 times to court, 59 times, and then in the middle of the night, not even call them to take this case to a Supreme Court. It's just simply reprehensible. But we should not be surprised. I mean, all their actions are continually based on lies, dishonor, and a lack of respect. And as Claire rightly said, nobody wants sympathy. We simply want justice. And that part of that justice is to get the truth. So we continue to stand with the families, and we will do everything in our power to tell the stories and to get you that hard-earned truth that you rightly deserve. So thank you all for attending today, and we'll be signing off with a legacy-themed video from our good friends at Relatives for Justice. Thank you.
My name is Mark Kelly. I'm the brother of Carl Ann Kelly, who was shot dead on the 19th of May 1981 by Fusilier Barry Scott from the British Army. She was shot with a plastic bullet outside the front of her house.
I'm Mary Heenan, and I'm 98, and my husband was murdered in 1973.
My name is Alana McShane. My brother Gavin was murdered in A to B taxis in Armagh on the 18th of May 1994 at the age of 17.
My name is Kathleen Duffy. I'm the mother of Seamus Duffy, my 15-year-old son who was murdered by the RUC. He was killed by a plastic bullet on the 9th of August 1989.
My name is Martin Mullen. I'm from East Tyrone. My Aunt Rosanne was a 76-year-old pensioner. She was murdered on the 8th of May 1994, and my mother was also injured in a gun attack at that night.
Siobhan Clinton and Tanya Mataram, Dún Warwi Mawami, Teresa Clinton, or an Carhu La Jeg de Abrin Ni Jeg Noha Cahar. My name is Siobhan Clinton, and my mother Teresa was murdered on the 14th of April 1994.
My name is Jonathan McCure, and in November 1982 my father Jervis McCure was shot dead, murdered by the RUC.
Our case has went to court for 25 years, from 1994 to 2019. Peter Sheridan was Assistant Chief Constable, and he was Assistant Chief Constable for 5 years while that investigation went on. At the end of the day, there was nobody convicted of the murder. It was all covered up, and people in charge of that cover-up can't wash their hands of that. There were very prominent people in prominent positions at that time while that murder investigation went on, of a 76-year-old pensioner watching television. Now with these new groups, we are expected to believe and pay heed to the likes of the same very people that sat in these senior positions all them years and was in part and parcel of the cover-up.
Hilary Benn is trying to put families towards the ICRIR. This will not do any good for any of the families. It'll just keep back all their cases. They're trying to hide everything. The ones who run that are the same ones who ran agents in this country for years and years and was responsible for the murder of my father.
I was 37 years of age whenever my Seamus was murdered. I'm now 73. And I'd like to tell Hilary Benn that he is no way going to put me off fighting against an RUC man that's heading this inquiry.
We have been waiting 40 years on justice on an investigation into my daddy's death, and we've been hindered every step of the way. And now the Legacy Act has been introduced by the Tories, and this time last year Labour said they were going to scrap it in their manifesto. They still haven't. It's government led, it's secretive. One of the main guys, Sheridan, was a former RUC officer. There are 10 RUC officers working within the Legacy unit. It's really insulting to me and to the other families that we are being asked to go to this body which has no impartiality, no independence.
I will never accept the ICRIR, as many families that I've spoke to ever will. It's just unacceptable, and Hilary Benn needs to hear this. He says he wants to listen to the victims. He hasn't listened up to now. Every time I see him, he's making excuse after excuses why the ICRIR should be kept. And for the first time, I am 57 years of age, and for the first time in my entire life in the north of Ireland have I ever seen everyone agree that this does not work.
Scrap the ICRIR now. Work with families, the Irish Government, human rights groups and the international community to put in place a proper lawful investigation process. It's the very least we deserve.